All right. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I'm super excited to be kicking off the Dude, You're a Bank live stream event series. Today, we're going to talk about the FTC's revision to the GLBA Act Safeguards Rule. And I know that was a lot, and that was me even shortening it. So what does this mean, and how should you as a dealership prepare? That's what we're going to get into today. To do this, we have a great guest. His name is Tom Kline. He is the lead consultant and the founder at Better Vantage Point. So he's going to be crucial in these discussions because of his years of experience in helping dealerships, mitigate risk and prepare for these kind of compliance laws. Also a great resource to have if you don't prepare in time and the fines start rolling in. So go connect with Tom on LinkedIn. Super pumped he's here with us. Our CEO and co-founder of Orbee, Atul Patel, is speaking with him. And Atul is fired up because he has years of experience in building software to meet some regulatory compliance. In his days with Jernaya, he patented something called Lead ID. I think he'll get into that a little bit. But without further ado, I'm going to let these guys get into it. If there are any questions that come up, please drop them in the comments. We'll try to get to them towards the end. So let me bring these guys on, and thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoy.
Good morning,
hey, Tom. How's it going?
It's great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
I'm great, thanks.
All right, I got the Orbee jacket. I don't know where the logo is, but it's all the money we spent on NADA. So, hey, look, I'm excited about an open dialogue. This is my inaugural webinar on LinkedIn. I know you have been openly talking about a lot of things, and so you have a lot more experience. So definitely give me some tips after this. But as Chris pointed out, I'm super excited about this. It's funny to say I'm excited about regulation. I think it's an important topic. I actually do believe that in this case, the regulation creates a new profound opportunity around customer experience. So maybe the FTC should be in the marketing automation game because they kind of get it. But I'm going to sort of let you start off with your background and just sort of your context related to GLB.
Sure. Thanks. It's great to be here, Atul. Thanks for having me. I'm a former dealership owner, a franchise dealership owner, have been in the business myself more than 30 years. My family has been in the business since 1925. So I'm a third generation car guy, and we've been in the auto business almost 100 years. So during my time at the dealership, I was in charge of making sure that problems didn't happen, or when they did happen, that we stopped them. And once we sold the dealerships, I started my consulting business. And so here we are.
Great. Do you miss it? Do you miss being on the lot and selling cars?
I don't. After 30 years, I was ready for a change.
Got it. Well, you get it through osmosis in talking to all the dealers now, right?
Exactly. And I'm still on the lots and I'm still in the stores. So I still kind of get it that way.
Cool. And then as far as GLB, what's your high level excitement or really what are you thinking about it? Just high level.
Yes. So the high level version, the way I see it at the moment, is that there are a lot of disparate pieces that the dealers are going to have to put together. There's no one solution where they can just write a check and say, here, I don't want to think about Gramm Leach Bliley anymore. It's not that kind of thing. It's kind of, I'm going to use the word insidious, if you will, because it crawls through all the different parts of the business and is going to require a concerted effort to get it done. So it's just not one of those things you can write a check and not think about it anymore.
Got it. Well, no, that's, and you've been dealing with just risk even beyond sort of privacy. There's so many pieces to how a dealership is regulated. This is just another one that's added to the pile. Well, I'm excited because, interestingly, in my last startup, I had patented a tool called Lead ID, and I had learned about so much of the issues around lead generation. You'd fill out a form at a lead aggregator for a mortgage rate, and all of a sudden you're getting bombarded by calls from every single bank in the city you live in and beyond. And that's because lead data is sort of resold over and over again. And so we created this universal ID number that became a way to track who got the lead. Was it a valid set of information? And it protected marketers from FTC compliance. And in that time, it was called TCPA, Telephone Consumer Protection Act. I got to get that right. So at that time, it was the ability for a consumer to effectively complain to the FTC that they received a phone call that they didn't think they should have gotten. And so they fill out a form, and all of a sudden, a bank or a mortgage company is now on the hook for a $5,000 fine or something around $1,500 to $5,000. There was a range of these. And so do you remember when TCPA was kind of the hot thing, and does it even apply anymore? Is it still an active regulation?
It is. And if, I haven't heard of many enforcements on it. I think because dealers are pretty good when somebody says, take me off your call list, they do in fact take them off their call list. So I don't hear much about that from that perspective.
Gotcha. Well, anyway, I'm in terms of the marketing sort of ecosystem in the dealership community, there's definitely a lot of vulnerability around GLB compliance. I believe that when you look at the stack of the dealership systems, right, you have DMS, CRM, and then you have a whole bunch of marketing capabilities that a dealer leverages to bring their audience, bring traffic into their store physically, digitally. And that's really where a lot of data is just, flying all over the place, right? So let's go into it. I want to talk a little bit about GLB, sort of high level, and then, talk about, first of all, the enforcement, because we did just mention that TCPA wasn't really heavily enforced. But what's the difference now? And what's the vulnerability here where consumers can whistleblow? And you could talk about Vroom and what happened there in Texas and so forth recently. But GLB was started way back in 1999. So it's been nearly 20 years, 22 years. And you could still have an episode like John Oliver had 20 years later, still talking about data and data brokers. But GLB was targeted to banks, just like HIPAA was targeted to the medical community. And both of these were signed back in 99 and 96 during Bill Clinton era. It's interesting because there's a lot of ways for a consumer to be informed of these. You get those notices in the mail of what your rights are. I usually just throw those away, right? But there's always those squeaky wheels, right? That one or two customer that sort of kicks off what can lead to action by the regulators or a class action lawsuit by private law firms. So talk a little bit about sort of what you just recently saw with Vroom and how that's sort of a great example of what could happen around the $46,000 fine that dealers could get per violation around GLB compliance.
Yeah, so briefly, it was just last week that the Texas Attorney General filed an action against Vroom for unfair and deceptive acts and practices, otherwise known as UDAP. And basically, what the complaint lays out is that Vroom isn't handling their customer problems. And it wasn't like 1 or 2 or 10 or 100. They allege, the Attorney General alleges that there are thousands of customers who are having problems with Vroom. And this is how it always starts with regulators, is a customer complaint. Customer complains, the dealership doesn't handle the complaint, and off it goes to the regulators. Same thing that just happened with Napleton that everybody I'm sure has heard about by now. The customer complaints weren't handled. In that particular case, they did a survey of the customer, and 83% of the customers surveyed said that Napleton stuffed products in their retail installment sales contract. So, an incredible number of people complained. So that's how I see is going to happen with the Gramm Leach Bliley regulators, and the FTC is going to come in. Once a customer complains about something else, they're going to come in, I think, and say, now show me what you're doing on Gramm Leach Bliley. Unless, of course, it's a data breach. And if it's a data breach, then that's the first thing they're going to ask. But the important place to start, I think, here, Atul, is that the data has to be encrypted, both resting and in transit. And I think that's a great place for you to start with everyone this morning, is to explain that particular issue, because until you get a hold of that, you're not really getting a hold of anything. I mean, you're really going to be handling too many disparate pieces. You're muted.
Thank you. So the first thing around that encryption topic, and really just where the data is, and in all of its disparate places, right? So first and foremost is, what is PII, right? And so that's the particular area that needs to be encrypted, right? You don't need to encrypt any of the other aspects, but it's the personal information of the consumers. So let's start with that. PII's definition keeps getting broader, right? In the FTC GLB sort of scope, we're talking about first name, last name, email address, phone number, social, anything that is not publicly accessible. That's PII. I do believe with the new safeguard rule, VIN has been added because you could reverse into who owns that VIN through data providers. So in terms of PII, there are state regulators that also expand that definition to include mobile device IDs and IP addresses and so forth. Is that the totality of it, or do you see the definition of PII growing over time?
Well, I don't know how it could grow much more, right? The way they expanded it this time is that PII includes your home address, which, anybody who's ever Googled themselves can see that most of the time your home address is out on Google for whatever the reason.
Let me ask about that. They talk about non-public, meaning you can't get it accessibly publicly. Now, you could get anything these days, right? There's those creepy people search sites that you could find anything. I could go door to door and get people's PII just by writing down the address on the curb.
Right.
But what we're talking about here is how you got that data, how you got it from the consumer, how you kept it safe, and how you reused it, right? It's
mostly keeping it safe, right? I mean, as far as they're concerned.
Right. So let's now talk about where this data is to even try to keep it safe. So when you go to a dealership website and you go into a trade-in widget, right? So you've come to the website and you've clicked on a link to trade in the experience. So I'm going to actually share my screen. I'm going to share a browser tab here because I'd like to get into the real nitty gritty here. So I'm going to go into this example here, and we're going to kind of look at this here, if I may. Sorry about that. We'll go to this one. So in this example here, I'm actually going to go into a website where there's kind of a bunch of experiences here, right? So I'm going to go ahead and either chat with a user here with this, and this is a third-party software platform. So if I put in my name, right, if I start writing my name in here, or I text them and I start giving my phone number, in all these cases, as you can see here, I've already provided my personal information. That's my personal email address, phone number, and so on. So when I do this, I have given my information to the dealer, or so I think. But what I've inadvertently did is give my personal information to a third-party vendor. Now, to the FTC, does it matter if it's the dealer or the vendor? How will that relate to the regulation about protecting PII? Give some thoughts around that. Now I'll talk about sort of how the database stores this and how it's going to have to be encrypted.
Right. Well, I think the FTC is certainly going to take the position that it's on your website, so it's your responsibility. And of course, part of the new regulations is that dealers have to have all of their vendors agree to encrypt their data. So it's on the dealers, it's the dealer's responsibility. Going back to, dude, you're a bank, right? The dealership is now considered a financial institution, or is considered a financial institution. And so as a result of that, they are going to hold the dealership responsible, irrespective of how many widgets or who they want to point fingers at. They're going to say the dealer's responsible, in my opinion.
Got it. So let's play this out. I have this whiteboard tool that I'm going to use here, and I'm going to take this consumer, okay? And what we're talking about is they go to the dealership website, right? So in this case,
Right.
They're on your dealership website, and the consumer has no idea that you're using all of these third-party vendors, right? So let's take a trade-in tool, right? So now you've got this trade-in tool, and in this trade-in tool, you're putting your PII. So you're putting your first name, last name, email address, phone number, and that's how many of the trade-in tools work, right? Well, whether it's Kelley Blue Book or Trade Pending, those are sort of PII gatherers. And another example is chat, right? So you're in a chat bubble and you're giving off your first name and last name and so forth. Even the text to my phone, I've seen these features on dealer sites where you could put in your phone number and all of a sudden you get a text message. But now they have my phone number. In all of these cases, PII is being generated. And what's happening here is this PII is being stored in each of their respective databases. So you've got, a trade-in tool having a copy of that data, chat program having to need to keep your information. And the argument is that they have to have this information, because how else are they going to email the trade-in report? How else are they going to chat back and say, hi, Atul, let's get you scheduled? How else are they going to text you or email you? But in all of these cases, Tom, this data is now not just the dealers over here in their CRM. So they, of course, get a copy of this lead. Every dealer knows that you get leads posted to your CRM. So they're giving you a copy. But let's be clear about something. In this example that I've drawn out, the PII information from the consumer is now in two places. It's at the vendor and the dealer. So
and you're assuming that vendor isn't selling that data.
Right. So in this
example, so I just want to be clear, because we know that happens.
Yeah. And it's interesting because there's always this notion of, hey, I'm going to use your data in aggregate. I'm not going to sell your dealership data, but it's always attractive to resell intent data. How does the actual internet know when you're in the market to buy a car? It's because they've pieced together what John Oliver talked about. You were on a dealer site here. You went into this iframe that happens to be collecting data, like, let's say, Kelley Blue Book, which has a sister company called Auto Trader. And so basically what we see here is this data could be resold. That's a different topic. But in the GLB regulation, this data needs to be encrypted in both places.
Correct.
The dealer system as well as inside of the vendor's system.
And in transit, Atul.
Right. So this arrow here needs to actually have encryption. So the ADF of today won't fly anymore, meaning the CRM systems are going to have to receive the data if this is the way that continues. Now, of course, I have a different perspective of how PII will actually be created and controlled by the dealer. But in this case, the trade-in tool or the third party, whatever it is, has to encrypt it. They have to encrypt it while sending the data to the CRM through ADF, which currently is done through email and XML data, which is wide open. And then the CRM systems or whatever systems that they use to market to that user will also have to be encrypted. All right.
Right.
And just to be clear, and I want to emphasize this to all the dealers here participating, it doesn't really stop there, right? If you take your CRM and now you have your PII here, you work with lots of vendors that help you remarket to those individuals, send emails to those individuals, text message marketing tools that take your list out of your CRM or your DMS for that matter, and blast out a bunch of text messages because they know they're going to bring those people back and they're going to buy cars from you. So what you end up doing is you actually end up starting to give this data. I mean, Tom, you know what's sad is the set of arrows I'm going to draw in here just goes on forever. And this is actually the dilemma that the FTC is having to deal with here. And we'll talk about this more, but you send the data to Facebook and Google, right? And you do this through either third parties or you do it directly. You upload entire lists into these systems to say, hey, find me these users. Because Facebook and Google have a great market share of email addresses. So if you have an email address, they have an identity for that person and they'll show your ads to them. You might even send them to an email provider, right? So you're going to upload this into your MailChimp. You're going to upload this into your advertising platform that exists in the automotive vertical. You're going to do this with text messaging as well. And you might even do mailers, right? Direct mail. In all these cases, each one of these requires PII. So are we, Tom, now saying that these arrows also need to be encrypted and these providers need to encrypt this PII data?
Yes.
And in all of these cases, what we don't know, it's not proven yet, there's no case law, but when you boil it down, the consumer gave the initial information or thought they did to the dealership. That's where it originated. And from there, it went to all these places. So if a consumer has a complaint receiving spam from a dealership because they're using some new email engine that just keeps hitting them up for 7 days because that's the buying journey, and they complain from a can spam compliance standpoint, what you said earlier is that could open sort of it could open the can of worms for the FTC. Could say, hey, I'm looking at your can spam compliance, but now how did this email address even originate? Where did you get it from? And then that could lead to more GLB compliance matters.
Correct. All that's true.
So coming back to this example, right? We're talking about really just how are you going to protect all this information? So obviously, dealers cannot, there's a lot of work ahead and the deadline is in December. But I want to talk a little bit about the fact that I just drew this out, right? And I drew out all these arrows here and everything that needs to get done. And we only have 7 months, 8 months. And let's talk a little bit about what you've seen, Tom, in terms of regulation, right? There's one thing to say, hey, I've sent a bunch of vendors a document, they've signed off that they are complying, and let's just hope and pray that nothing bad happens. Or you start working on a technical solution, the industry as a whole gets together. You know, there's an organization called STAR, which is sort of, you know, trying to build technical standards around a lot of these aspects. What do you see in terms of the trajectory, right? If December comes around and you've started to plug some holes, is the FTC going to look at that and say, okay, you're working towards a solution? Or is this really an absolute drop dead date? You might as well shut down your dealership if you don't solve this by December 9th.
Yeah, I think something like this, as well as all compliance, is, are you making a good faith effort? Are you, I mean, I wrote down some of the quick things on Gramm Leach Bliley, and I'm just going to read them real quick so that we have a kind of a broad-based understanding. There's too many here for me even to memorize. Designation of a qualified employee to oversee and manage the information security. Having a written security risk assessment. a formally written information security program, an incident response plan. So if you do have a data breach, what happens? Encryption of all the data, multi-factor authentication, system monitoring, penetration testing, vulnerability testing, endpoint detection, security awareness training, right? There's more on this list. So I think that a dealer has to make a good faith effort, number one, to put in systems that comply with all of these things. Number two, on an ongoing basis, to check to see how you're doing, right? Part of compliance, part of a healthy, robust compliance program is that you know what you're supposed to do. You have to check it. You can't just throw it out there and I'm done complying and I'm good. And, on December 9th, everybody takes a breath of air and says, okay, we're in great shape. Well, no, you have to keep a log on the compliance activity surrounding this. Are you doing your training? Are new hires onboarded properly? Do they understand what the new what they should be aware of in terms of phishing and all the ways the bad guys get control of your data? So it's not just a one and done thing. Compliance is an ongoing thing. So if you can demonstrate that, then I don't think they can come in and say that you're willfully non-compliant. I think showing them that you're making the effort to try to comply with all these rules and regulations is really the difference between how big the fine is. If they come in, they're going to fine you something. They're not going to leave without a check.
Right.
It's just how it goes. But, is it going to be a $10 million fine like Napleton? Or we don't know how much Vroom is going to get fined. And those are just the ones in the last 3 weeks that we've come across. So I think that's really where the rubber meets the road is, can they say that you're willfully non-compliant?
So is it like Billions? I've watched that series, and it's like the more money you make, the more problems you have, and the FTC knows how to look for that opportunity. Is that a fair statement?
I think this is, these regulations started, I'm sure, because people are tired of having their data breached, right? I mean, it's every day you get something in the mail that says your data breached and we're going to pay for credit monitoring and all that, right? So if you have a data breach, your stuff better be in order. If you're having customer complaints and you're not resolving them, people are going to go to the FTC, and I'm sure it's going to be one of the things on their checklist when they come in and say, okay, well, you're not titling like Vroom, you're not titling your vehicles in a timely fashion, and customers have to park their cars because they don't have license plates. So P.S. by the way, where's your Gramm Leach Bliley information, and what are you doing about it?
Yeah, so you're saying this isn't an isolated aspect. You can't expect to stay under the radar by just solving one piece or ignoring it. Something else in your dealership could open the door. And this is going to absolutely come out because, again, the GLB safeguard rules and the updates that have come through the last few years have defined auto dealers as banks. I mean, that's a done deal, right? So all right, let's in terms of and you're right about burning through 30 minutes here. I want to contemplate sort of where data is going, how it's getting there, because obviously now dealers want to know, okay, how do I start really mapping this out, right? Because that's our recommendation. The first thing you want to do is map out where all this information is being generated from your consumer. Where is it being stored? Where is it being, sort of resent through vendors and so on? And again, there's going to be some areas that are going to be very buttoned up, when it comes to certain elements around financing, credit, and so forth. There's other regulations like FCRA, that do regulate those aspects. But I want to talk a little bit about sort of how to audit where your data is starting from, right? So when we look at your dealership site, and I'm just going to pull up another example here. I'm going to, just kind of talk a little bit about an example of how you want to audit this, right? You could, of course, go to your CRM, you could go to your DMS, and you could get a list of people that have access to your account, right? Because we know, and look, I'm guilty of this. Orbee is a digital marketing platform for dealers. And so we get logins and things like that. And a lot of that is going to have to change, right? And we sort of know that that's coming. So in this example, what you really want to do is you want to be able to go through your website and really understand all the places data is being generated. So you first, and I want dealers to really start at their website, because that's where I think that the most vulnerability exists, because a lot of dealers just don't know what's happening on their website. And number two, it's really the bulk of your data. By the time a consumer buys a car and it's pushed into your DMS system, those are fewer, right? Those are the 5% of the people that ended up buying a car. You have another 95% of the people, and you still have their PII. You're not going to destroy it because you have this relationship with them. You want to basically reach out to them, make sure that you're available to them when they do want to buy a car. And so you're going to store that. So when I look at all these widgets, and then even if I go fill out, even if I go to the service center and I schedule a service, and I am now in this scheduler, and you could tell something is loading here. I'm now in a Mopar service scheduler. So when I view the frame source, it turns out that, Tom, I'm actually giving my email address, phone number. I mean, look at this. This is like a dream come true for regulatory compliance right here. Give us your phone number, email, VIN, or non-PII confirmation number, and we will look you up. Well, this actually implies I'm now giving my PII. So if it goes into their database, it gets stored, it gets used to look up. That means my PII is there as a consumer. And that means you need to go as a dealer to all these vendors like Mopar and say, hey, how are you storing the phone number, email address, and VIN, right? Where are you getting that from? How are you storing it? Are you looking at it up in real time from my systems, or do you have a copy of it? And it's very likely, Tom, that everyone's syncing to your data. So they've got a login and they're downloading all this data every day, every week, every month. And so what I suggest dealers do is take a moment to really go through their website. And we have tools that can actually identify all the iframes. And so use tools like that can tell you these are all the widgets on your site that aren't hosted directly on your website. They're in an iframe, right? Number two, though, is there's an underworld to the internet. So I'm going to get technical here. So it's not going to be too bad, but Chris, I'm going to have to share my entire screen this time. So I'm going to go ahead and share my entire window, and let me see if it can make it through here. So I'm actually going to refresh this web page, and you're going to see all this stuff. So you don't have to see it. I know the resolution is really tiny, but what I'm showing on the right is literally hundreds of third-party companies that now have access to listen to what's being typed. So theoretically, if I start typing my name, Atul Patel, or my email address or phone number, these scripts that are sitting on the dealership site can actually listen to that PII. So this is the worst of them. Knowing that you have a DMS system, knowing there's PII in there, that's easy compared to, hey, not knowing there's a script on your website and it is listening to PII being typed, the phone number, the email, the IP address, the VIN number, and the list will expand, right? MAID, that's your mobile phone ID number. All of these things are being collected. And there's a company in here that's kind of a creepy one. I like to use this example. There was a company that started a while ago. It's called Blue Kava. I met the CEO when it started, and Blue Kava was written up in the Wall Street Journal. And what they were doing is fingerprinting. So they would look at your computer screen resolution, how fast your mouse was moving, what fonts you had installed. All this is available, right, in your browser. And today that's not called PII, but let's face it, that's what John Oliver was talking about. You could reverse engineer who everyone is. So this company, Blue Kava, there's a few agencies and vendors and OEMs possibly that are using this tool. And so on your site, dealers, could be something that is reverse engineering the PII, going to another provider and getting the PII. So without Tom giving me his information, I could find his information. So let me ask you this from an experience, and I don't have the answer. If the consumer doesn't give their first name and last name and phone number, but I go and find it through some other means, is that still the same scenario that I now have stored the PII, whether the consumer knew, or is it actually worse, Tom, that they didn't even think they gave it to you and now you have it?
Yeah, I don't know what the legal, because I'm a business consultant guy, right? I don't know what the legal ramifications are for buying that data, right? Your question is, if I buy that data, am I safe from PII? I don't know. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but my answer to that is, if you buy the data, then you're then responsible for it because you have it, and so you're required to protect it.
Right.
And further in this example, just to bring up a really important point, in the new regulations, dealerships are required to have a data retention policy. And so let's just use the example that a customer goes and buy, you said, 5% buy or whatever it is. So you've got 95% of the people in your database that didn't buy. And you have to decide what you're keeping of that data, because as the FTC sees it, the data is actually a liability. So you have to have a retention policy and a business reason to want to keep that data. Now, you may be able to say, I want to keep it because I want to market my service department. I want to keep it because I want to market my parts department or my body shop or whatever that might be. But that's part of the new regulations, is you have to have a data retention policy, implement it, and make sure that that's also getting followed. So you have to make sure that's getting complied with too.
So no one wants to go into their CRM and delete 95% of that data. I imagine.
Right.
So there's got to be a better way. So I want to talk on two topics. One is loopholes. I've been seeing a lot of talk around, hey, is there a way out of this? What's a customer? What's a consumer? There's a lot of, it's easy to look through scripture like the GLB and find loopholes, right? Sure. And that's one topic. And then another sort of topic is a different way to look at data, how to store it maybe internally at the dealer and lock it up from vendors. It's kind of something I'm passionate about. We have some patents around that, and I want to talk and just sort of propose a couple of ways that dealers can try to think about it. So let's dig into loopholes. So
no, actually, I think we should dig into the other first because it's more important.
All right, let's do that. So I'm going to sort of draw out a example that may sort of be a way for dealers to rethink information. So I'm going to redraw this. Let me change this to yellow. Sorry. I've been seeing my kids do Khan Academy, so I got intrigued by that. If anyone's a parent, you've seen this before. But let's take this consumer, and when they actually go to your dealership website, as I wrote earlier, instead of the user going into a widget like a trade-in tool and typing their first name and last name, what I believe is going to be the future is, instead of this data going to, let's say, the trade-in tool, so instead of going here, it's actually going to go to the dealer's database. Okay. Now I know that sounds like, oh man, now you want me to have a database Well, dealers already do theoretically have many of these systems in place, but yes, it is going to require, you could either do everything Tom had mentioned earlier, hire a security personnel, do intrusion testing and do all that, or you can potentially use Amazon's cloud, some sort of cloud provider that does this. So now all of a sudden the PII is owned by the dealer. There's no copy anywhere. So the trade-in tool, the chat program no longer has the PII. It's stored with the dealer. The dealer locks it up. And then there's actually a benefit here. Not only can you centralize the protection of that data, the safeguarding, but now no vendor has a copy of it to accidentally or purposely leak it, resell it, use it in ways that the dealer who helped originate that data on their website ever meant it to be, right? So
Right.
if you think about all these widgets, right? The chat widget I talked about, you're chatting, all of these, imagine if every time I give my PII, it goes to the dealer's system and the dealer says, hey, any vendor, if you need the PII, you need to tell me why. So let's say an email company says, I want to send emails for you. So can I get a list of 25,000 records from your CRM? Well, remember, if you do that, you're back up to the previous diagram. Now you got to make sure that's encrypted, that when you give that information, it isn't used for any other reason. And then you've got all this disclosure in California. You got to disclose to the consumer that their information may go to XYZ company. And so instead, what if the dealer says, I have an email engine, so I will send the email out. I will send the text out. And it's sort of hard to contemplate, like, how would I, as a dealer, send the email out? How would I send the text message out? But this is what we've been working on. You know, this is what at least we at Orbee have been working on. I believe that there's going to be many solutions to this style of approach. But all of a sudden, the dealer never has to share any of the data with any other vendor, and it's stored internally. So let's use chat, for example. How will a chat program ever be able to say, hi, can I start with your first name? And I put in Atul, and then it says, hi, Atul, I hope you're having a great day. How are they going to actually say, you know, hi, Atul, right? Because they don't store this information anymore. Well, the future, in my opinion, is, let's say a chat widget can't say their first name anymore. They're going to put, and everyone who sent an email, many dealers who are on this webinar who have used MailChimp or some email engine or even Dealer Socket, you use these macros. And so you say, hi, first name, I hope your weekend's going great. Our dealership is open. Well, imagine if all of a sudden every vendor who ever wants to communicate with phone number, email, everyone who wants to put in PII into the body of the message, like hi, Atul, has to just simply say hi, first name, and the dealer system replaces that. So now all of a sudden, the dealers centralize the PII, the consumer benefits because their information is not everywhere. And just imagine the customer experience when you don't have to tell people your name again. Right? How many dealership websites have you gone to where you're in the trade-in tool and you're putting in your first name, and then you're in the chat tool and it's asking for your first name again, and then you're in the credit report, credit form, and you're starting to type your PII again? This actually this is the biggest opportunity, in my opinion, to use regulation as a backdrop to creating the best user experience for your car shoppers and to protect your customer from being used by another dealer to market to them, or by a big aggregator like an Edmunds or Kelley Blue Book or CarGurus. And so this is a fundamental change in the entire model, I believe. And so what are your thoughts? You know, Tom, you've worked with a lot of dealers, and so you've had to deal with regulations. No one wants to be a lawyer and no one wants to be a tech person. So how does this actually get sort of, how do dealers take advantage of this regulation and take steps towards it from your perspective? I have a view of this, but what are your thoughts?
And I like any solution that simplifies things. I always appreciate KISS, right? Keep it simple. And because there's so many complexities and there's so many things to worry about at a dealership, and there's so many people and there's so many mouths and there's so much going on all the time. So anytime that you can simplify, I'm all about simplifying. And I like this solution because you're basically taking this big data ball of which, what do I do with it? And how do I make sure all my 30 vendors that I have are complying with it? And what you're doing in a very simple way is saying, the way I'm going to comply is I'm going to take control of it, and I'm going to do this for myself. And by doing that, you let the vendors in that you want to let in. You give them the information that you want to give them. And so you're controlling it, you're keeping it simple, and you're making sure the data is encrypted because it will be encrypted. And so this really, I like it because it's simple.
And the set it and forget it model, right? That's what every dealer wishes they could have with this, right?
Right.
Can I just send out a legal agreement, get indemnification from the vendor, and forget about it forever?
Right.
And
right.
Is there really a set it and forget it model when you let your data go out there to hundreds of these vendors that are taking in this information, using it to serve you or serve themselves? Can you really ever set it and forget it?
I mean, in a compliance program, you have to check it. Now, you don't have to necessarily check it every day, but you have to check it, because if the regulator comes in and says, I want to see how you're making sure that you're complying with this, you have to be able to pull out a log book, or there's some software programs, of course, that do this electronically, and software as a solution. And somehow you have to be able to show. It can be a 3-ring binder, or it can be software. It really doesn't matter, as long as you can show that you're trying to comply with it.
And if you centralize it and control it, that single log you get out of it is the log. It's not like I need to now go to 20 vendors and compile each of their logs, because the leak happened through 3 degrees separated, right?
Right.
The vendor who used a vendor who used a vendor. All right. Well,
and you're also, it also, I should have said earlier, I like the solution because you're mitigating your own risk, right? You're really boiling everything down to one thing, and then you're the one who gets to control it. So anytime you can control your own risk, I think you're doing yourself a good service.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to balance and weigh the work that it sounds like it means compared to being asked to get an audit done on everything that's happening with your data. And I think that it'll become clearer and clearer as we go further down the line, and maybe the FTC has some action against a large group and whatnot. And like you said, maybe Vroom will. There'll be something else that comes from the AG and or the regulators at the top. So, all right, look, we've talked about a bunch of topics. I kind of hope this was, again, the first session we've had here where we're openly talking. So Tom, thank you for sort of chaperoning me through this here, but hopefully we've touched up on various topics here. It was supposed to be an open dialogue. So I'd love to, I don't know if Chris, we've gotten any questions, but I'd like to sort of let dealers know that, there's a lot of information out there. The NADA, Brad Miller had published a lot of information, and we'll send out links to all of the attendees, if you've registered, of resources that you could read there. There's obviously a lot of public material being written by lots of vendors in this space. And lastly, would love to get any questions. Tom's a great resource for the broader set of risks and liabilities that dealers have. And I'd love to always brainstorm, how we can use marketing innovation to protect consumers and benefit dealers. So yeah, so thanks for attending, everybody. Chris, let us know if there are any questions.
Well, so far, no questions. There's a little bit of a delay, so maybe some will come in.
Yeah.
Brian Kramer at Germain Toyota, he says, no matter how simple anything is, it is never simple enough. I spend more time on simplification than any other activity. After culture, it's the most important thing in auto retail. So,
and Brian is right. Absolutely. Who can argue with that?
Yep. Thanks, Brian. Well, good. Look, this is an open dialogue. We're going to keep having additional sessions and love the debate and discussing how we're going to move forward as an industry. Thanks, everybody, for joining. And thanks, Tom and Chris.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
bye, everyone.